Hello there, my name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as LevDev, and I'm here continuing on my set review of the upcoming Magic the Gathering expansion Core Set 2019. In our first video, we took a look at the factor of the playability of cards within the multicolor/gold cards that are upcoming in the set. Now, for this video, I decided to actually take a gander at the artifacts/lands that are upcoming in this set. As mentioned previously in the video, and I won't repeat myself for the upcoming videos and such, the range go by here essentially ranges from either going to be playable, to maybe, to either jank play, to no, which is pretty much saying no, it's not going to see play in the formats. And we're going to try to cover a quick cover of multiple formats such as Standard, Brawl, Commander, and Eternal formats like Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. Now, we start off looking at the artifacts in this upcoming set, and we start out with a pretty big doozy. A free mana artifact called Crucible of Worlds. Commander players might have a hunch that this is actually a very valuable reprint upcoming. It's a free mana artifact, and it has one simple ability. You may play land cards from your graveyard. Now, this ability actually has been in Standard for a little bit on weaker creatures such as Ramunap Excavator and some other semi-enchantment, semi-sorcery spell cards. So, let's get into the obvious formats in which this is going to be playable. Commander and Brawl, this is probably going to be a Commander playable card, and it's going to be a Brawl playable card. There are decks that synergizes with kind of like a landfall-y type mechanics, or they benefit from sacrificing their lands and just bringing them back for versatility uses, and they're like utility lands that require sacrificing lands and such. Plus, there are commanders that benefit a lot with landfall, such as Omnath is one that comes to mind. Also, a new one is Tatyova, which in Brawl might benefit a lot with Crucible of Worlds. And with currently still legal in our current Standard, at least for Brawl, the Deserts, it's actually pretty tempting to think that we have access to being able to play utility Deserts again and again and again, even though we sacrifice them. That is really good. In Standard, I'm going to say maybe. While there's a temptation to try to make either Simic or Sultai landfall style deck, reliant mostly on Tatyova, the problem is this card can kind of easily get removed if people know what your overall game plan is. A Braid is still a popular card in this format, and even if Braid doesn't take it out, there's a Braid, there's Flashing Brontodon. It's one of those cards that I think you're just going to be wasting your turn free in Standard playing this. Now, for other internal formats like, I would say, Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, mostly it's no, with the exception of some very fringe cases of people playing it in jank brews in that format. But mostly, this is just the value card of the set, and you just want to pick it up for either putting in your Commander/Brawl deck, and probably try to get away with a janky brew once in a blue moon. But, honestly, just pick this up for value. It's a really high value mythic in this set. Up next on our list of artifacts to take a look at is the free mana rare artifact called Desecrated Tomb. And this simply has the ability of, whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 black creature token with flying. So let's first think about the playability within formats like Limited or Sealed. The thing is, this type of card wants to go into a Reanimator style deck within those formats, and there's only two that I can think of that are possible. One of them is the Zombie deck, which, completely honest, the Zombie deck, it's going to be tempting to try to draft it, but I think it's going to be a hard one to do in Sealed unless you get extremely lucky. And even then, I don't know if you would want to play this card. it's just one of those cards where it's a free mana, do nothing until you do your reanimation spells, which could either be very early, it can also be very late. And while the temptation of the fact that anytime you do reanimation spells, you can actually get a 1/1 bat token, I think that's still slow enough that I don't think it will help with the pace of the potential format. Unless the format is really, really slow. So, both in limited and sealed, I say this is a maybe card to, I would just say, a janky card. Like, pick up this card and then pick up all the reanimated cards you can get and just see what happens. But remember, Naturalize is a card in that format, so there is a chance that if you try to go off with this, that you might get your overall game plan kind of screwed. Also, standard playability, I'm just going to go out and say it's janky. There is some Godfarrow's Gift decks or even some slight reanimation type archetypes within the current standard format. Like, I could think of a few cards that would be fun to try to brew a reanimation deck around of, and even powerful planeswalkers like Liliana and such that can actually help encourage and actually help generate your tokens once you do the reanimation spells. Plus, if you stack it up with cards like Annoyed Procession and actually make a bunch of lords to help buff those tokens up, even though I don't think there's any Bat Lords in the format, but, you know, like if you have a white-black deck with Banalish Marshal or something, then maybe you can get away with some janky play with this card in Standard, but I would be very cautious because, yet again, a Braid is in the format. Now, for formats like Modern, I don't know. I think this is a no. There's way better reanimation payoffs that they have access to in that format, and I think they would rather have those payoffs rather than the payoff of having a 1/1 black-back creature with flying. Also, in Vintage and Legacy, that's also another no. Like I said, they have better reanimation payoffs, and they do not want to waste a turn just to make this so that if they have to, whenever they reanimate, oh, you get a token. Nice. So, no. Commander and Brawl, I'm going to say maybe. I think some people might just put this in as their 37th to 23rd card within their Brawl deck and just test it out. And I think that's the safest place to play it. Play it in Brawl, play it in Commander, in your Reanimator style decks, and just give it a shot. Because then you have better payoffs with those tokens and such. You don't have to just use them as chump blockers. Like in Commander, maybe you can use those tokens with an Ashnod's Altar, generate more mana, or which can help you reanimate more, and then generates more tokens. Vice versa and vice versa. So yeah, I think this is a card that for a majority of formats, rather other than Commander and Brawl, I would say skip this card, and you are going to feel really bad when you pull this out of your rare in your pack for limited. Hey there, sorry for the significant time cut if you notice like different lighting and different shirt and such. It's just that when I was trying to record this, well, it's around July 4th around this part, so fireworks abound. Anyway, our next artifact that we're going to review is the Amulet of Safekeeping. A 2-mana artifact. It's whenever you become the target of a spell or ability controls, counter that spell or ability unless a controller of the spell, mind you, pays 1. Creature tokens get -1 and -0. Now, let's get to limited first. Is this a card you're going to play in limited and draft or sealed? I'm going to go out on a limb and say no. While there is some token generation in this set, and there is some actually nice kind of like early game creatures and such that are token generators, I don't think you just want to draft this card and think, oh, I can counter that Mogwall Marshal, or Warren Instigator, I think is what they named in this set, that's essentially Mogwall Marshal. Yeah, I don't think you're just going to play this just for the factor the counter to tokens in limited. While there is the temptation to play this for the first ability itself in limited, I think limited is going to at least be decently slow enough that I think this is going to be irrelevant. Sure, the opponent can't cast the Mind Rod on turn 3. Well, if they still think your hand is significant enough, they don't mind on playing it on turn 4 if they don't have anything to play on turn 4. Yeah, in limited and draft and sealed, I think this is a no. Now let's go to standard. Standard, I'm going to say maybe. On one hand, this is a great counter against some relative control decks and also some specific token decks. Like, case in point, like, this is actually a nice counter to mono black control, since majority of the spells they use target you specifically. However, the only thing is, against tokens, I don't know. It's just one of those things where since tokens are not really going wide now, they're more going tall. I think just minusing one attack is not going to be totally relevant. On the other side of the coin, though, in the current standard format, it does actually make that monkey that comes from that legendary pirate into actually a 2/1, so it does, or 1/1, so it doesn't attack for as much damage. Actually, now coming to think of it, I think this is still a high maybe going into playable, because the factor is it does actually, it's a semi-decent counter against the current burn decks in the meta. But on the other side of the coin, a braid. Now we go into Modern. Modern, this is a playable card. This is actually some nice tech card against some currently popular decks in the meta. Mardu Pyromancer is the one that I can think of right off the bat. But there's enough token decks that do like to go wide in that format that Amulet of Safekeeping is actually good on the second ability itself. And if you can get any plus of getting this out early and them not seizing you on turn 2 without having to spend an extra point of mana, nice. Now, in Legacy and Vintage, I'm going to go out and say maybe. Like I said, in Vintage and Legacy, there are wide decks, there are decks that are control-y, and you might get this out since it's cheap early enough to help you with your board state advantage. But it's maybe because it might just be, even with the very cheap cost, it might just be too slow. Still, it's not going to be fun pulling this in draft, but it's going to be at least nice trade fodder for people who need this in their internal formats or even toying with it in standard. Next artifact on the list is a 1-mana artifact called Fountain of Renewal. It has the simple ability that at the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 1 life. And for free mana, you can sacrifice it and draw a card. Okay, let's just start out with limited right off the bat. I think this is going to be my janky rating for this one. While there is the temptation that there is a life gain deck in this format, I don't know if you want to go slow enough to play a turn 1 artifact. Like, there are better even enchantments that can help you with life gain within your current board state presence. It's one of those where I think it's just too slow and limited. It's just one of those where, yes, this is a great turn 1 play, which is cool. But if you draw this, like, on turn 5, turn 6, like, it gets really better the earlier you play this, and it gets so worse the later you draw this within the game. So, unless you have the most jankiest life gain deck ever in Sealed and Draft, I say this is janky. Don't pack one, pick one this, please, for the love of God. Or don't, like, oh, you pack one, pick one, a really significant life gain card, and then be like, oh, this will benefit. I mean, unless you get like a playset of a Johnny's Pride Mate or some shtick like that, be very cautious when playing this in Limited. And now we get to Standard. In Standard, I'm just going to go out and say no. The factor that a braid and really popular artifact removals that's in this set, I think this is just, even if you get this out in turn 1, I don't think it can counter the burn decks as efficiently as other cards in this set that can help you with life gain and such, and even some current standard life gain cards. So, no in Standard. In Modern, yet again, I'm going to go say no. While there is the temptation to put this, or at least toy with this, in a Soul Sisters type deck, which is a popular archetype in that meta, I think in that meta there is just a lot more better life gain cards in general. And I'm just going to reiterate on this again. Great to play this on turn 1, but the sooner you play this card, the worse it gets. Like, imagine being at 1 life, and then you need to draw a really significant card, and then you draw this. That is going to feel really, really bad. Now, in Eternal formats like Legacy and Modern, no, I'm going to go say, and Vintage, no again. Like I said, this is just one of those cards where it's just going to feel really bad playing this card and just it whiffing out. Now, in Commander and in Brawl, I'm going to say maybe. It's one of those cards where in Brawl specifically, if you do have a life gain deck and you just need another way to gain life for synergy within your deck design, this ain't a bad option to put in a Brawl deck at the very least. In Commander, I'll go with maybe again. If you don't have better life gain options in that format for a 100-card deck and such, it ain't bad, and the mana sink for drawing a card in Commander for how slow that format can get at times, it's not a bad casual card. So in general, I say this is one of the bad artifacts in Limited, so don't draft this for artifact decks, may I remind you. But I think this is going to see most of its play just in casual formats like Commander and Brawl. Don't play this in Standard, don't play this in Modern, and don't try to play this in Legacy and Vintage. I just think this is one of the bad artifacts in this current set. Continuing on artifacts that are not exactly great in this set, we're going on to the Gearsmith Guardian. A 5-mana artifact creature construct at common. It's a free 5, and it has the ability that it gets +2/+0 as long as you control a blue creature. Now, once we get to the blue card, there is actually a blue card that I think actually synergizes both with the art, like having the little person on the bottom and the artifact creature itself on top, and both of them give each other +2. From an art design perspective, this is actually really cute. And it's actually just nice to see. Now, let's actually go into the playability of this card. In Limited, I say if your draft and sealed pool is really, really bad, you can play this card. I'm going to go on just the maybe on this one, because you only play this if your pool is bad, and you have to go into the artifacts deck. But this is a bad artifact. The factor that it's a 5-mana free 5, those stats in general are just okay. They're not great, but they're okay. And the ability is kind of irrelevant. So it can become a 5/5 that, as long as you control a blue creature, cool. Can you get in this with evasion? No. So, yeah. This is... I really just want to go and say no, but I'm just going to go with maybe, because if you have a really bad draft or a really bad sealed pool, it's a playable card at the very least, but you're not going to have fun playing this. And, well, this is going to be quick on all the formats, so standard. No. It's just there's a lot more better artifacts currently in this format, ironically from the Kaladesh block, that you do not want to play a 5-mana free 5, even with a plus stat boost. It's too fast enough that you won't see play. So, no. In Commander and Brawl, yet again, I'm going to say no. There might be some people who, in Brawl, might make a Kaladesh theme art style Brawl deck just for thematics alone, and they might just put this in for that. If they need an extra card, which I don't think they need, but like I said, this card is just something you're not going to just put in just because, oh, it might become a 5/5 someday. In Commander, no, a lot of better artifacts. And then let's just actually go quick with Modern Legacy Vintage. No, no, no. Wow. Other than the factor that it's a maybe in limited formats, this is one of my first almost all no cards. Yeah, like I said, if you want to go into the artifacts deck, be very cautious of putting bad artifacts in there. If you have a better deck archetype you can play, don't try to cram into trying to go into the artifacts deck because of playing this card. I don't want to see people playing this card unless they absolutely have to in limited. Capiche? Capiche. Now, going from that not really good artifact whatsoever to actually a pretty decent artifact. This is the Gargoyle Sentinel. Sorry, mispronunciation there. It's a free mana free artifact creature gargoyle. It has Defender, and you can spend free mana to until in a turn, Gargoyle Sentinel loses Defender and gains flying. So, let's go with Sealed first. This is fine in Sealed. It's one of those cards where, sure, you can't attack with it, but as an early game defender, this ain't bad. Also, it is kind of hilarious in the Arcades style deck where you can actually not have to worry about the mana sink. Like, if people try to draft Arcades and go into a slight defender sub-strategy, this is not a bad pickup if they can pick it up. But this is just a decent card in Limited in general, so it's playable. Like, the point where you get into the game where you can give it flying and such and give it evasion, and it's just good for early game jump blocks. So yeah, playable and limited sealed. Standard, I'm probably going to go out of the limb and say maybe. It really depends on if people try to do a standard, yet again, an Arcades Defender deck. Then, if people try that, this is not a bad card to put in those style of decks. It is prone to a lot of removal in the format, don't get me wrong, but if you can try to remove this and then play another high cost-effective defender in Standard, if this is supposed to be the sacrificial lamb for your other good defenders in the deck, if there are other good defenders in Standards, like I said, I still need to check, then yeah. Now, in formats like Brawl and Commander, yet again, it's a playable card. And yet again, I'm just going to go on the Arcades wagon with this one. If you play Arcades, I hope I'm pronouncing that Elder Dragon right, aka the Defender Dragon. If you're playing the Stradicious Elder Dragon in Commander and Brawl as your commander, this is just a fine card to put in your deck. So yeah, it's playable in there. Now for formats like Modern, yet again, I'm going to go with maybe because, like I said, the Defender deck might play this. There are better walls in that format, but if you need like a 23rd wall, this is not one of the better options, plus the factor that you can give it flying is nothing to sneeze about either. In Legacy and Vintage, no. There's a lot more better artifacts in that format, and even if they do try the Arcades strategy deck, there's a lot of good walls in those formats that they can use rather than this. So in other words, this is actually a fun card they reprinted for limited formats, and it's also going to be fun for some casual formats and maybe even standard and modern if that Defender deck is popular enough to try out. Next artifact we're going to review is actually another reprint. It's the, and forgive me if my pronunciation on this, the Magistrate Scepter. It's a free mana artifact that has 2 activated abilities. One of them, you have to spend 4 mana to put a charge counter on Magistrate Scepter. And then the second activated ability, you remove free charge counters, so you have to spend 12 mana first and free turns, in theory, to remove the free charge counters, and then you can take an extra turn after this one. Okay. Let's go into limited first. I think this is a legitimate... If we go with sealed, it's a maybe. It's one of those cards where if your deck can be controlling enough and slow enough that you might get some significant as this being a mana sink. Are there better mana sink artifacts that help encourage the control deck a lot better? Yes, and we're going to get to that pretty soon. But I think some people might just have fun toying with this because they get tempted because the extra turn. Actually, let's get into a little side topic about that. I know many beginner players are going to look at this and be like, oh, I can get the extra turn and I can get a significant advantage. Here's the thing when you get extra turns in formats like Draft and Sealed. All it is, it's you just essentially being able to either play an extra land, maybe play an extra creature, and maybe get in for an extra attack. Maybe, depending on even if you're not in a chump board state where it's hard to attack it and such. So don't go into best case mentality with this. Yeah, it's maybe, but I do kind of want to lean on no. But it's maybe. If your deck is slow and control enough, you might actually just have some fun toying with this card. But it's casual fun, and yet again, this is one of those it's leaning onto bad artifacts that I would not play to quote-unquote try to make the artifact deck work. And the other thing to keep in mind, there is some artifact removal in the limited format, and it's going to feel really bad for you to spend 8 mana on this and then try to spend the last 4 mana. Whoop, got removed. You can't take your extra turn. Yeah, that's going to feel really bad. Now, in formats like Standard, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I am so tempted to say no, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe. The fact that the Winder Constrictor decks are decks in the meta, and there are ways to get this to have... They get this go off by 2 activations if you have Snake on the field. It's a tempting thought, but yet again, it is one of those very slow artifacts that is prone to a lot of the removal in this set. Actually, instead of saying maybe, I'm going to go and say janky. If you want to put this as a janky inclusion in your Snake Winding Constrictor decks, or just try some weird decks of infinite turns and such, then go give it a shot. I don't think there's enough tools to make it possible, but I think it's still just worth a shot just for fun, for just laughs and such. Now, in formats like Commander and Brawl, it's playable. It is one of those where those formats can relatively be slow-paced enough that you can have this as an interesting mana sink, and the extra turn that you can get from this card in those formats can actually help you out a lot. So, I would say it's definitely playable in those formats. Now, in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, Modern, janky. There are some decks that do like to toy with charge counters and such, and this is a card that people like to toy with in those formats. Legacy and Vintage, I'm going to go with no, with the caution to note that it should probably be maybe, because if my recollection is correct, I don't think there's any decks in those formats that play this reprinted card that I can recall. So, while this is a fun design for a reprint, it is one of those bad artifacts that, yet again, if you're going into the artifact, wow, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but still, don't play this artifact that's kind of bad and sealed just to be in the artifact deck. Just only play this if you're controlling enough and slow enough, and you think you can actually benefit significantly from the extra turn. Though, to be fair, that's kind of a beginner's mistake. Maybe this is one of those beginner mistake trap cards, now that the more that I think about it. Well, we'll see once people play with it in the format. On to our next artifact from this set. It is Malelift. It's a free cost artifact, and it has the ability to tap it, and you can add 1 mana of any color. So, this is one of the 2 mana rocks that are currently in this set. Now, let's go to formats like Limited and Draft. This is a playable card in Limited. It's one of those cards where if you go into either a ramp style deck, or you're the deck that's splashing for a 3rd color bomb, this is a great inclusion. It just helps you ramp up quick, and it's just, you can get it out pretty easily on early, and then just use it to ramp up to later stuff in the game. It's a great card. It's one of those cards, though, that it is prone to removal once people figure out your gameplay strategy if they have it. But still, having a mana rock like this to filter for any, or not filter, to generate mana of any color, it will help you so much. It's a card that seems unassuming at first, but don't underestimate this card in Limited. It's awesome. Now, in Standard, I'm going to say maybe to janky. And the main reason why is this is another mana rock for either decks like Storm, Artifact Storm, or Paradox Engine style decks that might actually toy with this card. On the other hand, it is kind of a reprint, since I'm pretty sure this was from the Amulet block, so if they weren't toying with the card then, they probably wouldn't be toying with the card now. And then there is Gilded Lotus. So, I'm going to go on a limb and just say, maybe. Now, in Modern, no. There's just better mana rocks out there, and better even mana dorks that they can use over this. In Legacy and Vintage, yet again, same thing with Modern. It's no. Better mana rocks, better mana dorks. Now, in Commander and Brawl, it's playable. If you need a mana rock that can filter for any colors, while in Commander there are a lot better mana rocks, this is not a bad budget option. And in Brawl, it's not a bad budget option for a mana rock either. So, if you need it for your deck, if it's a multicolored deck, or a ramp deck, or such. So, this is an artifact that in general, great for Limited, and it will see its fringe play in either a very janky standard deck, or just your Commander and Brawl deck as a good budget option. Next artifact we get to is a 2-mana equipment, Murata Stats. And it has an equip 2, which means you have to spend 2 mana to equip it to a creature. And it gives the equipped creature +2 in attack. Let's get to Limited Force first on this. I'm going to go with janky, because I do think that there are some artifact decks. This is a bad artifact. I would not recommend trying to cram this in and try to get an artifact deck working. However, there is some aggressive decks in the format that might actually just not mind this to give an additional attack boost to their creatures to get in for damage and such. So I think in limited formats and draft and sealed, don't pick this up early, but if you do get this later, it's not bad. It's not great, and yet again, I'll reiterate, this is not an artifact to play to make the artifact deck work. But if you have an aggro-based deck that actually benefits using Murata stats, yeah, it's decent. It's not great, but it's decent. Now, this is going to be an easy one, since it's one of those bad artifacts. Do you play this in Standard? No. Even with cards like Danifa in the meta, there's just a lot more better equipment you could be playing to equip to Danifa and get the stat boost and such. So, no to that. Modern? No. Legacy and Vintage? No. Commander and Brawl? Commander, I'm going to say no. Brawl? If you really are trying to make a specific equipment deck work with some of the equipment legendary creatures that they have currently in that meta, you might put this in as a 37 card if you need one more equipment, but it's not. You should cut it out as easily as if you find a better equipment. So, in general, I only want to see people playing this if they need to with limited aggro decks, and that's pretty much it. Next card on our list of artifacts to review is the Diamond Mare. It's an artifact creature horse, it's 2 mana, it's a 1/3, and as it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever you cast a spell with the chosen color, you gain 1 life. Now, one thing to keep in mind that this is actually not the only horse in the set. There's actually a horse cycle of having horses in every color and having a colorless horse. So, for those people who in Standard want to make the indestructible horse deck a thing, you got some nice tools to try out at the very least. We'll get to those horses once we get to them, but for now, let's actually stick on to this horse. So, in Limited and Sealed, like Draft and Sealed, it's fine. It's one of those cards where it's more like a 23rd-ish card in the deck. It's not the best creature you can play. A 2-mana 1/3 is not bad defensively. And the fact that you do get the life gain by whatever color of cards you're playing is a nice benefit. But it's one of those cards where it's easily cuttable if there's a better 2-drop or if there's a better card you want to put in the deck. It's not bad, and I say it's still playable, but cut this out as soon as you can. In Standard, there is the temptation to put this in the horse deck and then just use the life gain you get from this to make the bunch of horse tokens with that 1 horse from the Hour of Devastation block. While that is tempting, I think there's a lot more better ways to go about that. Still, I'm going to put this under janky because there are people who are going to try the horse deck again, and this is not a bad card to toy with and test. I think the fact that it's prone to a lot of removal, though, will make it not as effective in those decks, but it's something to at least try out. Now, in formats like Commander and Brawl, I'm going to go on a limb and say maybe. If you need like a 23rd creature and maybe you have slight benefit of life gain strategies, it's not a bad card to put in the deck. Actually, coming to think of it, going back to Limited real quick, this is actually not a horrible card in the life gain decks. I wouldn't say don't go out of the way to put it in for a life gain deck, but it's not a bad inclusion. Now going back into Commander and Brawl, this is just a 23rd to 37th card. If you need a card, and you need a defender that's not a defender card, so to speak, it has decent enough stats. Now in formats like Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, that's a freeway. Nope. Like I said, there's a lot better artifact creatures, and this type of card that has the benefit of, oh, you name a color, you gain life gain if you cast spells with that color. Other than some specifically very fringe decks, you're probably not going to use this. Yet again, I think this is just going to be fun and limited. It's going to be fun to try in those random standard decks, in my personal opinion. Now we're going back to not a great artifact. It's Explosive Apparatus. It's a 1 mana artifact that has an activated ability of free mana to sacrifice it, and it deals 2 damage to any target. Okay, there's some people that might have good memories of this card when they were playing it during the Shadows of Innistrad and Eldritch Moon block. I want to remind those people who played it in those limited formats, the reason why this card was decent, other than just being a semi-okay removal spell, is that it helped with Delirium. Which, we'll get onto a sidetrack where that mechanic depends on how your graveyard is and how many different creature or card types are in the graveyard. In the core set, we don't have any mechanics like that. So, overall, in limited, such as draft and sealed, I'm going to go on a limb and say it's either going to be maybe to all the way to no. While I think people will play this if they absolutely need an artifact or they need a removal spell, but there are better options, and I think this is just too slow enough for that format. And yet again, this is a bad artifact. I don't want to see people playing this artifact to make the artifact deck work. Plus, it doesn't make sense to try to play an artifact like that to try to synergize with the artifact stuff when your main purpose with this artifact is actually to remove it, to actually remove stuff. Yeah, limited. I'm going to go with maybe, but my inclination is wanting to say no really badly. Now, in standard, yet again, no. It's just too slow. It's one of those where, while it is tempting to toy with maybe in some artifact style of decks, most of those decks in general want to keep artifacts on the battlefield. And like I said again, this one, to get the most efficient use out of it, you have to remove it. I mean, maybe... You know what? No, I'm going to say no in standard. Even for the factor of using it as a cheap artifact, there's just so many better cheap artifacts from the Kaladesh block that you can use over this card. I have good memories of using this in Eldritch Moon and such, but yeah, you're not going to play this in standard. Now, in formats like Commander and Brawl, yet again, I'm going to go out on a limb in Brawls and Commanders say no, with the implication of saying that unless you have a way to regenerate this artifact or bring the artifact back and recursion it, it's an entertaining thought, but I think there are better artifacts you would rather recur than a 1 mana artifact that can be a free mana shock. Yeah. Other than that, I think it's safe to say, going into the other formats, Modern, no. Legacy, no. Vintage, no. This is yet again, with the exception of some very fringe, or if you really need removal for your deck to help against like mid-range to early game aggro, you might be able to use this. But yeah, this is a card that it's a bad artifact, and I don't want to see people playing this just to make the artifact deck work. Guys, we are not in the Shadows of Innistrad block again. Unless we have zombies in our graveyard doesn't matter that much as it did before. Just keep that in mind. Okay? Okay. On to the next artifact in this review. This one also came from the Eldritch Moon, also Shadows of Innistrad block, and it is the Field Creeper. It is a 2-mana artifact creature Scarecrow that's a 2/1 with just flavor text. Now, for limited formats like Sealed and Draft, it's a maybe. It's one of those cards where it is slightly playable in the sense that's a 2-mana 2/1, so if you need a 2-drop, it's fine. It is also an artifact, so while I still want to kind of put this under the slightly bad artifacts. Don't force this in your artifact deck if you need to make an artifact deck. It's one of the least bad ones you can put in there, because at worst, it's a 2-1. Also, funny enough, it kind of has the same thing like Explosive Apparatus, where most people actually, this was a lot more playable during the Shadows of Innistrad block because of Delirium. But for here, you're really only taking advantage of the factor that it might give you some artifact synergies, and it's a 2-1, 2-mana 2-1. So, in limited formats, it's a maybe. In Standard, no. They're just better 2-drop artifact creatures in the meta, so I would say no on that. In Modern, yet again, no. Vintage, no. Legacy, no. There's just, like I said again, there are better artifact creatures in those formats. In Commander and Brawl, I'm going to say no to Brawl, specifically because there are a lot of better artifact creatures, and I don't think you want a 2-mana 2-1. Commander, I mean, if you have that one guy that has a Scarecrow deck, there are, ironically, in the history of Magic, better Scarecrows than a 2-mana 2-1. But, hey, if you need it as a 37 card, But yeah, this is more just for limited. If you need a 2-mana 2-1, there are worser 2-drops in the set, but there are also really better 2-drops in the set, so keep that in mind. Next off is actually a pretty good artifact in this limited format for some fringe decks. It's actually a pretty decent artifact in general. It's the Meteor Gollum. It costs 7 mana. It's an artifact creature golem, and it has the ability that when it enters the battlefield, sorry about that, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. As I mentioned before, in Limited, specifically Sealed in this case, this is a playable card. It's one of those where if you're either A, in the ramp decks, or B, in a control style deck, I don't know if artifact control is a thing, but if you can delay the game long enough to actually play this card, it's just a free that it has removal on it. It removes planeswalkers, it removes annoying enchantments, it removes annoying artifacts, it removes annoying creatures. It's just unconditional removal. Very high cost unconditional removal, but unconditional removal nevertheless. Plus, there are also cards in the set that actually can help you roundabout ways actually repeat this effect by either making it into a copy of this creature or bouncing it back and such. So, for that alone and the versatility, I would say this is definitely a playable card both in Limited and in Draft if you're in the archetype that's either ramp or you... excuse me there. If you're in the limited archetypes for Draft, that will support this card. In Standard, I'm going to say maybe. The factor that this is an artifact that does unconditional removal, while it is at a high cost, I don't think you cast this for its cost. I think people might consider putting this in Godpharaoh Gift-like style decks, or decks to find a way to cheaply get this artifact out. Because a 7-mana free that's unconditional removal, yeah, that feels a little bad. But a 4-mana version of that, using Refurbish or cards, or any Reanimator style cards, to bring this back as unconditional removal, it's not bad. I mean, it's slightly better than Chupacabra in the sense that you can target anything other than creatures. Now, in Modern, I think Modern, Legacy, Vintage, it's all no. There's just better removals in that format, and that are more cheaply costed. Now, in Brawl or Commander, I say this is playable. There's a lot of decks that either try to make, either in Brawl or Commander, that try to make either duplicates or flicker, or duplicate battle cries and such. And this is just probably a nice top-end card for those sub-strategies. So, overall, this is going to be a decent draft and sealed card, and I think it's going to at least see some fringe play in Standard, as well as Commander and Brawl, but any format beyond that, I think it's a redundant thud in that sense. But still play this card because it's pretty good. Next on our list, of artifacts to consider, is the 2-mana Millstone. It's a 2-mana cost artifact with one simple ability. It's 2 mana tap. Target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. There is a sub-strategy of mill currently in the limited formats and such. And I think this might be just a tempting card to toy with in limited formats like Draft and Sealed. Keep in mind, though, you want to specifically go in that archetype before you consider playing this card. The thing is, Mill is a lot more effective in limited formats. It's because the deck sizes are a lot smaller, 40 cards. So you can theoretically get this victory condition a lot more consistent than in other formats. However, this is one where you don't want to make it a sub-strategy. If you're going to be the Mill deck, you need all the mill pieces. And the catch-22 problem with this is that a majority of the mill cards are uncommon. So, on one hand, I think they might be easily passed around, and I don't think people will jump into this archetype right away. On the other side of the coin, there's just some people who have so much fun with this archetype that it might also just be easily snatched up. So in Limited, I'm going to say maybe. If you're the lucky person either in Sealed or Draft to pick up all the mill cards that are uncommon and one rare, which I don't know if you played a rare one, but it's a maybe. But this one is in Limited for Draft and Sealed. It's a maybe. In Standard, I'm going to go and say janky. This is a card where people try to make mill decks work in Standard so much, even though we've been given so many pieces for it. The problem is, it's really slow. Plus, since Reanimator is an archetype that people play with in the format, you might just be actually accidentally assisting them to their win condition than actually getting to your own win condition. And in formats where you're trying to be competitive, that could cost you a lot. Now, in formats like Commander and Brawl, it's a playable card. People will try to mill decks in these formats, and some of them are actually a lot more successful than others, and this is just not a bad card to put into them. Keep in mind, though, in Commander, when people like mill-type cards, they like to try to make mill cards where it affects all the players on the board rather than just one player. But this is just not a bad card to include if you can be a grindy enough deck in that format. Now, in formats like Modern, no. If you even play in a mill deck in Modern, there's a lot more effective pieces than Millstone. Plus, kind of like in Modern and both in Standard, this is going to be prone to a lot of the artifact hate that are currently in those formats. Same thing goes for Legacy and Vintage. No. There's a lot more effective mill strategies, and they don't need Millstone. So, overall, pretty much I think this is only going to see play in some fringe Commander and Brawl decks. And the one lucky person, either in Draft and Sealed, who gets all the mill pieces and tries out the mill deck and probably has a blast, or accidentally goes against the zombie deck or the reanimated deck and has probably a really bad time. Next up is actually Rogue's Gloves, which is actually a reprint, believe it or not. If I recall correct, this was in a previous core set. It's a 2-mana equipment that has the ability that whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Equip costs 2. So for Limited, for Sealed and Draft, I say this is playable. It is going to be a 23rd card though. I don't think you should go first pick this. But it is a card that if you do get the ability on a very evasive creature, overall the incremental effects do benefit you in the long run. Be cautious though. make sure it's on an evasive creature and such, or make sure that you can actually get the damage in. If you deck can't do that, then I would say try to avoid playing this card, because then you're not really going to get the incremental effect. There's no stat boost to get damage, so all it is you're just hoping that you can sneak in some cheap point of damage and draw some cards to help you with resource advantage. Now, in formats standard, no. There's just the factor that this is a very artifact hate-centric meta. I think this card is too slow for the meta. It's one of those where it might have the benefit that it might be very unassuming to people until you put it on the creature that can get in. But even then, the only advantage is you draw one card. And there's a lot of better card drawing spells and options for players in the standard format that they don't really need Rogue's Gloves. And it doesn't get the stat boost, so it doesn't give more attack damage, so they can swing in for like more damage and such. So in standard, no. In Commander and Brawl, if you're playing the Artifact Voltron deck with some of the legendary creatures that they provide, I say this is playable. It is one of those that I might want to put some better equipment in there, but if this is my only option, I'll give it a shot. If I could put it on a nifty creature and just get the card draw and then cycle and such, it's not bad. Now, in formats like Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, it's an all-white no. There's just better ways to draw cards in those formats that you don't really need this artifact. It's just kind of... And the fact that you have to spend 4 mana to put it on the creature, hope the creature doesn't get removed, to get the combat damage in, and hope you draw one card out of it. There are just better card drawing mechanics. So, overall, I say play this in your funny Brawl deck, play this in Commander, play this maybe in Draft as a 23rd card, but for the love of God, if you're playing the Artifacts deck, don't play this bad artifact to be your artifact to do artifact synergies. You're going to... Well, okay, maybe if your deck is a lot of Thopters, so you can get in with Thopters to draw cards and such, that's probably the catch-22 to that rule, but be cautious when playing this. Don't just play this just so you can get artifact synergies. Play this if you know you can get the damage in, and you can draw cards. That's pretty much my catch on that card. Now, let's get to an equipment artifact that I would highly consider playing no matter the circumstances, and that is Sigiled Sword of Valor. It's a free mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has Vigilance, which means for people who are new to the game, it means that when it attacks, it doesn't tap, so you can use it both as an attacker and a defender, or block on the opponent's turn and such. And it's a knight in addition to its other types. There is a knight tribal sub-strategy in this meta, so keep that in mind. And then, whenever a equipped creature attacks, create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance that's attacking. Okay, let's go through the formats, shall we? Well, actually, let's just get to limited first. In Draft and Sealed, yeah, you're going to play this card. The factor that it gives a stat boost, and the factor that even with the stat boost, it might make it into a significant creature type if you go into Night Tribal in the limited formats. Plus the factor that when you attack with it, you actually do get another creature attacking. In some aggressive style decks, or even just tribal decks in general, they will appreciate having that token there. And if both the creatures get in for damage, then hey, you can use the knight as a blocker for when the opponent tries to attack and such. This is not a bad card. This is a really good card. This is a card that you might pack one, pick one this, and try to go into knights. And it's one of those artifacts that if you are in the blue-white artifacts deck, you're going to have a blast playing this and might even keep a sub-strategy of knights in there, but it's good. In Standard, this is a maybe. The card is good, but it is relatively slow in that format. You have to cast it for free, and you have to equip it on a significant creature for free that can get in and attack and generate the tokens. While there are cards like Anointed Procession that does make it tempting to be like, oh, once I put this on a creature, I'll create 2 attacking tokens. That's cool. On the other side of the coin, we are still in an artifact hate-centric meta, so this might get easily abraded for actually Brontodon, and it's just going to feel bad once you play this and then it gets removed before you can even take advantage of the attack effect. Now, in Commander and Brawl, it's playable. There are Commander and Brawl decks that kind of focuses around the Knight theme as a tribal, and this card just fits right into it. You make a creature into a Knight. If you have like a utility creature that you just put in there for utility, it becomes a Knight, which helps synergizes with your Knight strategy. Plus also the fact that you create the Knight tokens. This is just an overall really good card for those type of decks. Now, in formats like Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, Modern, I'm going to go with maybe, because while the format is fast and this might be too slow, there are token-based decks that might actually consider this card just as a way to generate more tokens, or tribal decks that might take advantage of this. Though it might be too slow for those formats. Legacy and Vintage, I'm going to go with no. I think this card is too slow for those formats. But, who knows? It is one of those where I think it's going to get most of its use out of Commander and Brawl and Standard, and it's going to be pretty close to, not an exact bomb in Limited, but it's a really good card for Limited. Yeah, have fun slashing away and creating Knight tokens. Yay! Woo! Next up on our artifact is the Sky Scanner. It's a free mana 1/1 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. In Limited, it's on the fringe to being playable. It's a decent card. The factor that it costs free mana is a little, for a 1/1 flyer, is a little... There's some people who will not even play 1 mana 1/1 flyers. However, the factor that you draw a card off of this, and there are ways to quote-unquote duplicate battle cries, or the factor you can bounce this to draw more cards and dig into your deck better, it makes this a tempting card to toy with as a 23rd card. Especially if you're in the artifact decks, this is one of the ones that might fringe on being bad. Don't play the bad card to put in artifact synergies. But it also might just be your 23rd card playable, and you have a lot of better artifacts. You played this, though, to help support the synergy. And overall, it's not bad. In Standard, I'm going to go with janky. There are Storm decks in the meta that would take partial benefit, especially with Panharmonicon, to actually dig into their deck further to try to get their overall gameplay strategy. But on the other hand, there are also better options to dig in your library currently in the meta. But if you want to go do this and just have it as both a way to draw cards and as a chump blocker, there are worse options, is what I'm saying. There are better options, but there are worse options. In Brawl and Commander, I'll say maybe. It's one of those, I think, in Brawl, if you have a artifact-centric deck that you need to focus on draw, and it has a flicker sub-strategy, this might actually work. In Commander, I think there are better draw strategies, but it's not bad as a 37 card, personally. Now, in formats like Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, for Modern, I'll go and give it an optimistic maybe. The problem is, it's a 1/1 flyer and it dies to all the removal currently in the format. But, who knows, maybe somebody will try a flicker deck with this to actually help dig into the deck more. But I'm also tempted just to give it an out front no. But I'm going to say maybe because it's a decent card. In Vintage and Legacy, no. I think the card is too slow for those specific formats, in my personal opinion. Overall, I think the one format that I haven't put in this review that I think it's going to be significant for, though, is Pauper. Popper might actually just love this card because the fact that you can draw a card and it's a 1/1 flyer, which blots against some of the flyers in the format. I think that's where it's going to see its shine most. So, yeah. Popper players are probably going to try to find shinies of these foils of these cards because it's actually relatively a decent card for that format. It's also decent and limited. You might see some fringe play in some commander decks and brawl decks, but that's probably it. Next up on artifacts to review, it's the Dragon's Horde. It's a free mana artifact, and it's whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, put a gold counter on this artifact. And it has 2 activated abilities. One of them is remove a gold counter from Dragon's Horde, draw a card, draw a card, and then another ability to just add 1 mana of any color. So let's go through the formats. In Limited, this is a playable card. The fact that it's a Malelift in disguise is actually pretty significant. Like I said, if you go into either splashing a third color or go into the ramp deck, this is just a decent mana rock. Plus, if you can get into the dragon deck or have good dragons to play in your deck and just use this mana rock to draw cards, that's actually really good. So I say, if you definitely have dragons and you do need the mana rock, play this. This is a playable card in Limited. In Standard, I'm going to say maybe. It is very dependent on if a dragon's deck happens in Standard. And if that is the case, yeah, you can give this a shot. I think it's playable. But I'm going to still stick to maybe because it is all dependent on if a dragon deck is possible in Standard. Now, in Commander and Brawl, yeah, it's playable. It's a Malelift. And if you pretty much dragon-style decks will play this card because they can both use it as a mana rock and as a card draw engine. So it's very versatile. Now, in Modern, no, there are better mana rocks. Even with the versatility of this, no. In Legacy and Vintage, it's no as well. Overall, this is going to be a fun, flavorful card to put in your commander decks, and I think this is going to be a great mana lock for Limited, with some potential fringe Standard play if a Dragon's deck happens in the meta. Next up on our artifact reviews is the Transmogrifying Wand, a free mana rare artifact that enters the battlefield with free charge counters on it. And it has the ability to tap it for 1 mana to remove a charge counter from it and destroy target creature. The control of that creature will create a 2/4 white odds creature token. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. I say for Limited, like Draft and Sealed, this is playable. It is a card where, in a sense, as long as you're in the deck that can be either very evasive or don't mind giving your opponents 2/4 Otses, either like a sack outlet where you can steal the Ots and then just sack it, or easily remove the Ots and such, this is actually just a really good card because, in general, for creatures, it's free removal spells within 1 card. Plus, there's also just versatility of actually destroying your own creatures, which, weirdly enough, with the Rakdos sack outlets, or even sack creatures like Dragon Egg and such, generating 2 tokens out of that, that's actually kind of tempting. Plus, also, it has versatility of being used multiple times, because you can either use cards like Disperse to bounce this to your hand, put it back on the battlefield, put free charge counters on it, and then go through the process all over again. Now, I'll say caution to the word. It is a semi-removal spell, in the sense that you are creating to your opponent, or to yourself if you destroy your own creatures, the 2/4 Ots. So, before playing with this card, make sure that you have creatures that can deal with 2/4 Otses, or can go over 2/4 Oxes. Because, while a 2/4 Ots is nothing to quote-unquote be impressed by, it also can just be a decent chump blocker to a majority of creatures in the format, so caution to the wind on that. In Standard, I think this is weirdly enough potentially playable. and that kind of caught me by surprise. I think the main reason why I think that, I think it's within this current rotation that it's potentially playable. And the main reason why is because with tokens, when they don't have mana costs, you could effectively create these tokens and then later kill them off with Fatal Push and such. And there's already enough high power creatures that they can either be evasive or just go over the odds token you create for your opponent. And that might just be good all in itself. Granted, it is easily removable by a Braid, so keep that in mind. But I think this is either... instead of saying playable, I think I'll give this my janky rating. I think this is one of those cards that I kind of want to make in Standard once on one of my casual Friday Magics, and just see how it goes. It just seems like a really fun card to toy with. Now, in Commander and Brawl, yet again, playable card. This card's just versatile, the fact that it's multiple removal spells within one artifact. And if you can either bounce this, flicker it, or just take advantage of either your own creatures dying by this or killing other creatures and making them into tokens, it just gets even better. Now, in formats like Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, I'll go and say a freeway no. While this is going to be fun in Standard, Commander, Brawl, and Limited, I think this card is slow enough that it won't keep the pace of Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. Who knows, maybe Saffron Olive will probably make some random janky deck for Modern with this, and then I might change my mind. But at the moment, next up on the artifact train is actually a really decent mana sink card, and it's the Arcane Encyclopedia. It is cost free mana, and it has the activated ability that you can spend free mana and draw a card. For limited formats, this is a really good card. People will probably underestimate this card at first because they think it might be too slow. But if the meta can be at least decent to at least a mid-range to slow enough pace to play this card, this is just a really good mana sink. The fact that you can dig into your deck on like either the opponent's turn and activate it, draw a card, and dig into your overall gameplay strategy, that's just fine. This is just a decent mana sink and such. Plus, also, if you're playing the Artifacts deck, this is one of those Artifact deck cards that I would actually recommend because it allows you to dig in, get more stuff to hopefully generate more artifacts, or to just help overall assist your overall finishing game plan. This is a card that I would recommend giving a shot in Limited. It may seem unassuming at first, but you're probably going to have a blast with it. In Standard, I'm going to go and say no. There's just a lot more effective draw strategies within and draw spells within the format that I don't think they need this artifact at all. Plus, the factor that we're in a very artifact hate-centric meta, this card can easily get destroyed before you can take advantage of the card draw. In Commander and Brawl, I'm going to say maybe. Like I said, these type of cards are actually decent if you know you're slow enough to actually take advantage of the mana sink. And digging into your deck further, and further, I think this is going to be a lot more effective in Brawl than Commander, because Commander has a lot more better draw spells. But in Brawl, if you need a way to draw more cards and both assist you in either artifact type sub-strategies, this is actually pretty decent. Now, in Modern, no, there's a lot more better draw spells, and it's going to feel bad you place this down in a very fast format, it gets hated out, and you lose. Legacy and Vintage, same thing applies, so I'll say no. Have fun with this in Limited and just give it a shot. You're going to be actually surprised. Especially in Sealed. This is a really good card in Sealed. It might see some fringe play in a Brawl deck and some fringe play in a Commander deck, but be very cautious. Make sure that your deck can be grindy enough that you can go into having this as a mana sink. Plus, also, hopefully Limited is slow enough that this mana sink card is very effective in it. But we'll find out. Next up on our artifacts is the Suspicious Bookcase. Ooh, cute cheesy noise here. It's a 2-mana artifact creature wall, aka has Defender, and it's a 0/4, and it has the ability that target creature can't be blocked this turn. So, essentially, this is an artifact creature that acts like a card very similar called Rogue's Passage. And, well, in Limited, if your deck is a slow enough artifact deck that you want to dirtle for a little bit, I say this is a playable card in Limited. As long as you're in a deck that wants to dirtle, a 0/4 wall is pretty good, and the fact that you can make your creatures be evasive for hopefully lethal damage and such, it's not a bad wall. Plus, also, if you're in the Arcades deck and you're trying to make a sub-strategy with Defender, this is not a bad option, especially when you can make it attack for 4, which is kind of hilarious. Now, in Standard, I'm going to go with an optimistic maybe. Yeah, it is prone to a lot of removal in the format, but I think this is a card where, the way I look at it, not as that a 2-mana Defender, but as a 5-mana, make a creature unblockable, or that can't be blocked. There are some type of decks that try to get in Voltron-y to try to get into lethal damage, and if you need to play this as an early game, get removed by a Braid and such because people are cautious about it, okay. But in late game, once you have your creature and you need to get in for lethal damage, this is just 5 mana, make a creature unblockable, go in for the kill. Now, I say this is more effective in Standard post-rotation because there are spells that actually do this a lot more effective / cheaper, but I do think it's a redundancy option for people who are trying those style decks to give it a shot. Now, in Brawl and Commander, yeah, playable again. Especially with Arcade strategy decks being a fiend, potentially with wall Defender decks, this is actually a really good wall. It helps to act like Rogue's Passage, so if you need to get in for lethal damage with either one of your high power, well, not high power, more specifically, high toughness walls, or just get in for lethal damage with something, that ability itself as a mana sink is actually really good in those type of formats. In Modern, yet again, I'm going to say maybe, depending on if the Defender Arcades deck in Modern is a thing. I think this is, while there are more better walls in Modern, this is not a bad sideboard option or just a slight mainboard option if you need to try to make your creatures evasive. The fact that you only have to spend free mana to make the creature evasive is not horrible, especially with Rogue's Passage. If I recall correctly, you have to spend like 5 mana. This just tapping it down and for free mana, that's actually pretty good. Now for its internal formats like Legacy and Vintage, I'm going to go out on a limb and say maybe. Which is weird for me to say, but I just think if Arcades decks are possible in those formats, they might actually have some versatility with this wall. The fact that the activated ability is free mana just... Even with the factor that the formats are really fast, I think this might have potential to see play. But I am willing to accept the fact that I could be wrong for this seeing Vintage or Legacy play. But it's an entertaining thought at the very least. The last artifact we're going to review before we move on to lands of the set, which, looking up, there's only like a few lands, so we should be done with this review pretty quick, is the Chaos Wand. The Chaos Wand is a free mana artifact that has an activated ability of tapping it for 4 that target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of the library in a random order. In Limited, for Sealed and Draft, this is kind of a trap card. The thing that you need to keep in mind in Limited formats and Sealed and Draft, on average, the spell count that an opponent will have is about 5 to 8, maybe a little bit more if they're playing the spells deck. And even then, if they're playing the spells deck, they're going to probably play a lot more cheaper spells that you investing 7 mana into doing this is going to feel bad to cast a random Anticipate, even if it's from your opponent's deck. It's one of those cards where, in Sealed, I think it's a fun card. So, rather than going straight no to this in Limited, I'll go say janky, because you might still just want to have some fun and just try it out. And hey, it's a very chaotic artifact, hence the name. Now, in Standard, no. The card's too slow for the format, and it can easily get removed by a lot of artifact hate, especially being at free mana, and it's costing 4. While it is tempting, since there is a lot of powerful sorcery and instant spells that people play in Standard, Vraska's Contempt, Into the Unknowns, there's just a lot. Or not Into the Unknown, what am I thinking? The one that bounces a spell to an opponent's hand, or not hand, library. There's a lot of spells that, and even blink of an eye. And stealing it from the opponent in Standard would be kind of hilarious, but I think it's slow enough that I'll give this the janky rating as well. Some people might just try this in Standard just for shits and giggles, and I say have a blast with it. It seems like a funny card to play. Now, in Commander and Brawl, it's playable. The formats those are in are relatively slow enough, as long as you don't go into a competitive Brawl or competitive Commander format, that you could probably get away with this. And taking a spell out of an opponent is actually a lot more effective, since in theory, due to the rule states of how Commander and Brawl works, other than basic lands, you can only have one type of card. So if you can take an essential combo piece that they need for that's at instant or sorcery, and cast it to give you significant benefits, that's a lot more effective in those in those formats in Commander and Brawl, especially with how deck construction works and such. I'd say give it a shot there. It's definitely playable in those formats. In Modern, no. It's too slow, and it can get hate out pretty easily. Piffy Needle, //. In formats like Legacy and Vintage, yet again, I'm going to go with no. I think it's just too slow. I think with this card, just have fun with this card in a very janky limited deck, or just any Commander decks and maybe a janky Standard deck or Brawl. But don't play it in the other formats other than that. And that is the last artifact. So now, we're going to move on to lands! Now, our first land is actually the only rare land that they're providing in this set, and it is the Detection Tower. It's a rare land that has the ability to tap for a colorless mana, and it has a activated ability to tap the land for 1 mana to, until end of turn, your opponents, note the plural in that, and creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the target of spells and abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. So in limited, I'm going to say no. This is a card that I don't think you would want to play in limited. While hexproof is on a couple of creatures in the format, I don't think this is effective enough that you want to play this to try to counter those strategies. While there are some hexproof creatures, there's not enough, and even the ones that do technically have hexproof might just have a semi-hexproof where this card is not really effective against them whatsoever. Now, in Standard, I'm going to go out and say maybe, actually. With the one factor is that since Shalai is a very popular card in Standard, and there are hexproof cards or cards that give you and your creature's hexproof and your planeswalker's hexproof and such, this might actually just see some fringe play to help counter against those decks, especially if the Standard meta within their local community focuses on that sub-strategy. So I would say this is playable in Standard. In Commander and Brawl, yet again, playable, but keep in mind your local meta. if they're not playing that many hexproof style creatures within their decks and such, there's just a lot more better utility lands you could be putting in those decks. But if they are playing with them, it's not a bad utility card. In Modern, I'm going to say maybe. Utility lands are a thing, but I do think there are better utility lands that opponents will use to actually help make an opponent lose hexproof and such. And there are not that many creatures to quote-unquote use this against. Though, if you do have that one guy who plays the Bogos deck at your meta, then you might actually just put this in just to counter that deck. Like I said, this is a really meta-dependent card. It depends on your local meta, whether or not you want to use it or not. And the same thing goes for Legacy and Vintage. But I think I'm going to lean on no in those formats, because I think there are just better ways to remove hexproof creatures rather than trying to use a land to pump mana into it and then remove the creature. I mean, hexproof can pretty much die to Diabolic Edict. Enough said. Next land in this cycle is the uncommon land Rupture Spire. Rupture Spire. It is a land that enters the battlefield tapped, but when it enters the battlefield, you have to sack it unless you pay 1 mana. However, it is a land that can add 1 mana of any color. In Limited, this is a playable card. The factor that if you go into a 2-color or a deck that does splash for a 3rd color for a 3rd color bomb, you're going to appreciate this land even at how slow tempo it is, the factor that it enters in tap, and the factor that you have to make sure you pay a mana. The factor that you can generate mana of any color will help you a lot in the game. Now, put this only in the decks that you think you will need this. If you are a very fast-paced deck and you want to go in aggro, I would say don't use this card unless you are splashing for a 3rd color. Because the tempo loss with this land is something to be considerate about. In Standard, I think this is a card that I'll see play in post-rotation. It's one of those cards where there's a lot more better generate mana of any color lands currently in the format. Aether Hub is the one that comes right off the mind. However, I think this might see play potentially post-rotation, especially with Ravnica potentially coming in Standard. And if people try to do multicolored decks, they might actually appreciate this land a lot. And the factor that we lose the Aether Hub, so yeah. In Commander and Brawl, it's a playable card. There are people who play this card, especially if they're multicolored decks, that do love the mana fixing on this. They can generate mana of any color and hopefully cast their spells of multicolor a lot more easy than if they don't play this land. Now, in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, they're all a range of, I would say, no, because there are better lands in the format that actually are faster tempo that still provide the ability that this land provides that helps benefit their gameplay strategy a lot more effective. Fetch lands, shock lands, paid lands. I could go on and on. But overall, I think you're going to have fun with this in Limited and in Standard post-rotation. But this is just a great Commander card. It's a great Commander land for multicolored decks. And the last land that's uncommon, it can pretty much say the same thing. The next land in this cycle, before we get to the common lands, is actually Reliquary Tower. And this is an uncommon land that has, you generate colorless mana, but it gives the player the ability that they have no maximum hand size. Now, in Limited, this is a no. There's not enough draw effects that you want to actually benefit most from this card. And the factor is, it's a card that generate colorless mana. Mostly you want to have cards that help generate you mana of your color and such. And the factor that this generates colorless mana for a ability that is not really going to be relevant within Draft or Sealed, in my personal opinion. In Standard, I'll say maybe. It's one of those cards where there is enough control style decks that do draw a lot of cards that the land base, though, is very competitive for those decks. However, they might consider toying with this card to actually help keep their hand, because in control decks, they want to keep their resources to themselves. So, being able to have access to another control spell without having to discard it if they draw a ton of cards is actually something to keep in mind. So I say this specifically for control style decks, or for very janky burn decks where they try to make their hand really big and then play a spell that makes them discard all their cards to deal damage to a target opponent equals to the number of cards in their hands. It's a thought. I don't know if this card will encourage it, but it's a thought. Now, mostly the reason why they printed this card, completely honest, it's because it's a good reprint for both Commander and also now a Brawl card that is going to be very useful in Brawl. Now, the reason why this card is useful in those specific formats, it's because the format is a singleton card format. You can only have one of each card. So your hand, your grip, and your resources is a lot more precious than in other formats. Case in point, you don't really want to discard a card that might be essential to your gameplay strategy if you have more than 7 cards in your hand. So the fact that you can have your hand size be not limited to 7 cards allows you to keep hold to your gameplay plan a lot more consistently. So yeah, this is just going to be a reprint that is Commander players are going to love, plus that promo art for the Magic League. Oh, I want that promo so bad for my Commander decks. And in Brawl, I think for the decks that want this card, they're going to have fun with it, but I think it's just going to be a standard utility land in Brawl decks, personally. Especially post-rotation once utility deserts are out of the meta. Now, the very last set of lands that are currently in this set, and I'm going to go by these quick because majority of these are just either in the quote-unquote, as we talked about with the gold set, in the signpost colors. They're just essentially multicolored tapped lands. So, they are lands that enter the battlefield tap, but you can tap them for 2 colors. For example, Sinded Bearers, you can tap for red and a black. Forsaken Sanctuary, you can tap for white and a black. Highland Lake, you can tap for blue and a red. For Meandering River, blue and white. For Foul Orchard, green and a black. Stone Quarry, red and a white. Submerged Boneyard, blue and black. Timber Gorge, red and green. And Tranquil Expanse for green and a white. And Woodland Stream for green and a blue. And I think that's it. So, for formats like Limited, it's a playable card. If you're a 2-color deck that relies on these colors for whatever land you need to produce, it's actually pretty playable, even with the slower tempo pace of being tapped. Plus, if you splash for a 3rd color, it's a very useful land to actually use if you get a land that's in your 2 colors and then your splash color. It's a very versatile land in that sense. One thing to keep in mind, though, and this is actually a theme that's upcoming for this core set, these lands actually have the potential to be in your common slot to replace your basic land slot. So now in draft, as a ruling, you do have to draft your basic lands as well, rather than keeping them out along with the token. So now all you have to do is take the token out, and you draft your lands for a more consistent format. So, that's just call it a PSA or just a little announcement to keep that in mind, so that people don't actually take the lands out of draft. But, I say for limited formats, if you need these lands, you can play with them. I would say don't put too many of them in there, just put in like 1 or 2 for either your splash color or if it's in your colors. Because the tap land does have a significant tempo cost. So, if your deck is very high aggressive enough, you might even not consider playing this land if you need to keep the tempo advantage or like the aggressive advantage. So, keep that in mind. In Brawl and Commander, Brawl playable, Commander, maybe. There are people who Commander does give you access to a variety of better, versatile, multicolored lands that can actually enter in the battlefield untapped, and even some that are better untapped that enter in the battlefield tapped as well. But if you need it, I mean, there are worse options. Just remember the tempo loss that you're going to have once you put this tapped land in. So keep that in mind, but it's perfectly usable if you need it. Replace it if you have a multicolored land that can enter the battlefield untapped, but if you need this type of land to help for color fixing and such in your colors in Brawl and Commander, it's fine. Now, this is pretty easy for Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. No. There are way better multicolored lands that enter the battlefield untapped that people will use if they need to for color fixing. And the factor is the tempo cost of this entering in tapped is a lot more significant in faster paced formats like that than they would be in other slower paced formats. So yeah, play this in draft, play this in your fringe commander and brawl decks if you need the color fixing, but be very careful when playing it in higher skill formats such as Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. I would say no on those, just don't. And I believe that is all the cards to review that are in the Artifact/Land Cycles. Next on, we're going to review all the color cards, so I'll see if I can try to get these all done before the pre-release. It's a little tricky since I'm trying a new editing technique out to try to make these a lot more better presented, but I'll try my best. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a lovely day.